call the regular, or a special meeting of the Huron City Commission to order. It is Saturday, May 9th, 2020, at 9:05 a.m. Could we have a roll call, please?
Smith.
Here.
Clute.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
Robish.
Present.
Mayor Howard.
Here. Let's stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we'll move to item 2 on our agenda, public forum. Public comments may be sent during this live meeting broadcast on the city's YouTube channel. The link is listed on the city website at www.huroncity.com/city-government. That's www.huroncity.com/city-government. In order to use the YouTube chat feature, please create an account with YouTube and Gmail, or use your existing accounts. And do we have any comments via anything? Comments?
We do have a couple emails that were received through the COVID-19 email.
Okay.
And one of them asks if there's going to be guidelines for restaurants that have buffet lines, and also if realtors are able to hold open houses at this time. The other one asks if the city commissioners would keep in mind when reopening the city that there are places like the library where people sit and spend most of their day browsing and touching, you know, a lot of different materials, and wants to know about you know, businesses like that and how that's going to be handled. We do have another one that urges the commission to reopen and feels that citizens can use their own judgment about social distancing when they go out and to let the citizens decide, you know, and take care of that themselves. I do not have anything else through the YouTube channel at this time or any other email messages at this time.
Okay, if we get any of those messages, we'll read them as we go, so let us know if you have another message that comes in, and we'll allow that to be read. Commissioner Clute, did you have something?
I do, thanks, Mayor. I just want to mention that I viewed the YouTube presentation of the task force yesterday, and I was so impressed with Officer Mark Johnson's presentation, and I just wanted to compliment him and commend him for his work, and we're real lucky to have a police officer of that caliber on the force.
Thank you, I agree wholeheartedly. If there's no other comments, as I said, if you have a comment, please send it in and we'll get them on air as we go. We'll move to item number 3, approval of the agenda. Do I have any changes to the agenda or motion? Commissioner Clute.
Thanks, Mayor. We have one resolution on the agenda listed at 4.2. I would like to add a 4.3 item, and we'll call it alternative resolution number 2020-08. If you want to list it, I believe all the commissioners have a copy
No,
of it.
they're in that. They're
right here?
That's it.
So
Yes.
they don't have that?
No.
Okay. So I'll pass those out, and I would like that added for consideration. You can call it alternative. If we want to change the number, I guess we could. But.
It would be the same number.
And just for explanation, the resolution attached to our agenda presupposes that we are not going to repeal the ordinance when we take up the second reading, because the resolution attached refers to the ordinance and sets out guidelines that would be mandatory for the businesses that we'd be opening pursuant to the resolution, and those businesses would be subject to penalties if they violated the guidelines. My alternative resolution allows us to consider repealing the ordinance, that is, on the second reading, voting to repeal, and then adopting non-mandatory guidelines that would not subject the businesses to penalties if they did not follow the guidelines.
Okay, any other changes to the agenda or motion?
I would also, I'm not sure if it's proper for it to be on the agenda, but I also have a different thought as far as it can relate to the ordinance reading, so it wouldn't necessarily
Okay.
have to be
It probably could be just a discussion on the ordinance? or-
Yes.
Is that all right?
yes.
Okay.
Mayor, I would move to approve the agenda as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor will say aye, opposed nay, and we'll call the roll.
Smith.
Aye.
Clute.
Aye.
Harrington.
Aye.
Robish.
Aye.
Mayor Albert.
Aye. We'll move now to item 4, ordinance and resolutions. 4.1, second reading of ordinance number 2211-6-2. An ordinance to repeal emergency ordinance 2207, addressing measures to slow the community spread of COVID-19. Do we have a second reading? Yeah, second reading, please, Planner Cranston.
Ordinance number 2211-6-2, an ordinance to repeal emergency ordinance 2207 of the ordinance in revision number 850, commonly known as the Municipal Code of the City of Huron, South Dakota, pertaining to an emergency ordinance to address a public health crisis by implementing certain measures which have been deemed necessary to slow the community spread of coronavirus, COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. This is the second reading to repeal that ordinance. Do I have a motion on the repeal, the second reading of repealing the ordinance 2211 dash, is that the correct number? 2211-6-2, is that the correct number? Okay.
I move to repeal the emergency ordinance number 2207.
Is there a second?
Yeah.
Second.
Moved and seconded to repeal the ordinance, or approve second reading, I should say, that would appeal the ordinance.
So will we be voting aye if we want to repeal then?
Well, let's have the discussion first. Any
If I may,
discussion?
If I may, Mayor?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I don't want to be redundant, but I think I set out what we need to do when I move to amend the agenda. But I want to first say that I think we come here this morning in large agreement. On Monday night, we voted to repeal the ordinance. That is, we voted to open up those businesses we closed in late March because of the emergency we were facing. And we also told the public that at this time, for the second reading, we'd be presenting guidelines for those businesses to operate. I believe we all left there believing those guidelines would be discretionary, that is, without penalty, would not be mandatory guidelines. They would be strongly recommended guidelines for these businesses to follow. But I did not believe that we would be proposing that these businesses would be subject to penalties for violating the guidelines. Since Monday, members of the commission have decided they do want those guidelines to be mandatory, that they do want the businesses to be subject to penalties if they violate those guidelines, and have drafted resolution number 2020-08, which is on the agenda right after this vote, which makes those guidelines mandatory and makes those businesses subject to penalties if they're violated. So therefore, if you're in favor of resolution number 2020-08, which makes it mandatory, you should probably not vote to repeal the ordinance, since that resolution implies the ordinance is still alive, and because it's referring to the penalty provisions of that ordinance. As I argued Monday night, I don't think we should make it mandatory because of the difficulty in enforcing those kind of provisions. It would be basically enforced by complaint. That is, people would be calling the police and saying these guidelines are not being followed. And then the police would have to go out and investigate and stop the violation and potentially charge whoever is causing the violation to be charged with an ordinance violation. I don't want our police to be in that position. I also don't want our citizenry to be in the position of being informants or snitches, if you will. I think, as I stated on Monday night, we've all been through this experience now for months. We've all gained tremendous amount of knowledge about the spread of the virus and what is needed to stop the spread. I think we are all capable of being responsible adults and following those basic rules of social distancing and personal hygiene. Also, no one's going to have a gun to your head if you go into these businesses, and I think that's ultimately what's going to cause those businesses to follow these guidelines, because I don't believe most people will go in there unless they're taking precautions about preventing the spread of the virus. That's my view. Like I said, I think we decided Monday these businesses should open. I think it's important, though, that we give them guidelines to follow when they do open. I also think it's important for us as a governmental body to tell the community in no uncertain terms that this pandemic is not over by a long shot, that if we did repeal this ordinance, it doesn't mean we think everything is back to normal, because it will not be, and that I think we would be sending a very strong signal to that effect if we if we repeal the ordinance and then we pass the alternative resolution number 2020-08, which I've distributed to the commission and which is on the agenda after the initial resolution. That resolution implies that we have repealed the ordinance and that these guidelines are non-mandatory. One last thing, I do think if you do not repeal this ordinance today, and then you adopt this resolution 2020-08, which contains the penalties, it's my legal opinion that this would be an amendment to the ordinance. You may be calling it a resolution, but we are, in effect, amending that ordinance, and I believe it would be subject to a second reading, just like any other ordinance, and would not be going into effect on Monday, as so many of these businesses have been led to believe they will do. We would have to have another meeting. That's my opinion.
Further discussion?
Something that I've brought up and have talked about, this whole situation has been, as the buzzword has been put out there, unprecedented. It's taken a lot of effort from everyone in the community, and I've lost more hair than I thought I had through this process. Listening to both sides within the community, I think we're being tasked to strike a balance within the community, and that's a very difficult decision for us to make, because it's our responsibility to keep the public safe to the best of our abilities, to the best that we can do, and implement laws to do that. But also there's a balance of freedom of free enterprise within our community. And that's a tough balance. And our current ordinance that's in place, I highlighted again the businesses that are under that ordinance and restricted. That does not include the total business community in Huron. It's very specific as to restaurants, food courts, coffee houses, bars, breweries, etc., recreational facilities, cigar bars, vaping lounges, hookah lounges. That's always one of my personal favorites. But, so, under the current ordinance, the majority of the businesses can be open. I think there's this stigma that businesses can't be open and function as business. The direction that we're trying to provide here is you can be open, but for your own personal protection as well as protecting the community and your employees, try to adhere to these guidelines. A thought that I had, because there seems to be some not a unanimous thought process on the commission. If we were to move to repeal the current ordinance today, that would in effect discontinue that ordinance. But the backup to that would be to reintroduce a new ordinance and craft it for future concerns. As Commissioner Klute stated, the virus is not dead, nor do they have a cure for it. We're struggling to maintain testing levels adequate to serve the public. And if we repealed the current ordinance and the resolution that's in place, it would allow us time to redesign a introduction of a new ordinance as early as next week with proper notice. That ordinance would have the framework in it of many of the items in the resolution proposals, but also it would give us a clean slate going forward. When we put the original ordinance in place, times were certainly different. We had to respond and we had to react very quickly with very little guidance from anyone, because nobody had and when I say nobody, we had direction from some of our higher level of government, but we really didn't have concrete direction. And by repealing the current ordinance in place, that would be an alternative to repealing the ordinance with proposed best practices, or approving the ordinance, approve keeping the ordinance in place and doing a modification. So in effect, we would be repealing the ordinance with the intent, public intent of reintroducing a new ordinance that would allow us some time to gather medical data, gather the public's input on what that could look like, gather the business's input on what that could look like, to something. I'm not looking for a unanimous conclusion on this from the public, but it's very clear that there's one side of the community that is saying, hey, let us do business. Let us open up and do business. And there's another side of the community which has responded with, what are you doing? Why are you opening these businesses? Keep in mind, it all, through this whole process going forward, it rolls back to personal responsibility. It rolls back to business responsibility of how they conduct business within the community and the safety practices that they put forward. Stay home. If you're concerned, I'm concerned. Believe me, I've spent 2 months very vested in this process. And I've left my home very little. I have the opportunity to work from my home. But I stay home because of my personal safety, my family's safety, and my community's safety. That's a personal preference that I take. I don't need a law telling me to do that. But I feel that we need to open that up for the businesses for people to make their personal decisions. If you're not comfortable going to whatever business it is and being in that environment, then stay home. Is it that important that you're at that business at that time? Is it a necessity, or is it, I just got to get out of the house and wander around a store? There will be a resurgence of this. It already is out there within the state. We haven't had reported cases in Beetle County recently, but it's sure to come. We may not have a community spread, but we will have positive cases and possibly deaths. We've had that very locally here with some with some folks that are family, friends, business leaders, teachers. So an alternative that I'm recommending would be to repeal the ordinance in place, start fresh with a new ordinance with the first hearing next week to wipe the slate clean, so to speak, and start fresh with something that we can put together that makes sense, that protects the safety of the community, but yet provide best guidance for the community to move forward.
Further discussion? Commissioner Harrington.
You said a lot there, and I guess what I'm coming away from it with is the fact that you stated that we should get some input from this person, some input from this person. We've been doing this for 2 months. I've got more of these things in my briefcase than I shake his fist at. We're never gonna get everybody to agree. What we are here today to do is to make a decision to move on. Not, oh, let's stop, and we'll start up again Monday, and then it'll be 10 days after that. I just don't think we can get input from the public, we talked about that. Yeah, we get this side, and we'll get this side, same thing we got today. We know what the public, half the public, or 30% of the public and 70% of the public say. We know what they say. We gotta make a decision. That's what we're here for. I don't know if, is there some tweaking of some of the resolution that Doug doesn't like, and number 8, that makes this one mandatory? But we could tweak that, we could do that. But there's an awful lot of good stuff in this resolution too, that we worked very hard for. Many people have worked, Barry's worked very hard for, the mayor's worked, we all have. I just don't, I don't know if we're making a new ordinance is, I don't know if that's necessary. I don't know. That's my opinion.
Further comments? Mr. Robish, have anything?
Yeah, I guess, just listening to both Commissioner Clute and Smith, I mean, very good points on both sides, very good. And I think, again, as Commissioner Harrington stated, we're here because the public knows we're here to try and help them to reopen their businesses, and sooner or later, when that magic day is, no one knows, but life has to go on as a new normal. There's gonna be new normals and whatever, but I think every business, I mean, back on March 22nd, we came here on Sunday afternoon in an emergency. That's what we were here for, and we drew up this ordinance in short order, and Commissioner Smith and the mayor and Gary Harrington, you were very much involved with that task force, I understand, and we appreciate all the time from everybody. But you can't build a scenario for every single situation. We can't do that. Nobody can do that. So we came as an emergency, and I think now the public has proved to us that they can handle this from what we put in place. And I mean, they've proved to us they can handle it. Now we have to, I think in turn, have to tell them thank you, and yes, you have done a great job. And no, this is not done. This is not over. You have to take it upon yourselves to keep doing this, what you've been doing. Like Commissioner Smith said, if you're not comfortable, you don't have to go to those businesses. You don't have to do this. If you're comfortable staying at home or whatever, that's what you do. But I think we have to try and put some normality back into this thing somehow, and then maybe work on another ordinance. That's very possible, because the surge is coming in the fall. It will probably be here. And I say fall because I hear that warm weather is supposed to deter this a little bit anyway. I don't know if that's correct. I have no idea, but let's work on it. Like I said, we can't build a scenario every time a scenario comes up. We can't build it for that. It's gonna come up. Let's work on it. I don't know who's working on that. I guess I can, you can, everybody has to, but let's work on something. But let's see if we can put it back into the public and say, thanks for doing what you did, and keep it up. And we'll help as much as we can, but at the end of the day today, we have to make the decision right here. We have to do that. And golly, there's a lot of people out there that can make a better decision than me, but guess what? I'm here, I'm doing it. I have to do that, and I'm okay with that.
And I also, if I may,
Yeah.
also I.
Further discussion, Commissioner Harrington.
Also, I think that there's a value in the resolutions. You know, I think that many of our employers would like to know, okay, what do you expect of us? Everybody wants to know what's expected of them. You know, no matter what you do in life, you gotta know what you expect of you and what you expect out of them. Resolutions do that. This resolution tells you, okay, here's some standards we expect from you as employees or employers, and move on. Also, what the resolution does, it allows the public to say, wait a minute, this is what's expected of those employers? Okay, I can live with some of these expectations. They're pointing out some things that I didn't think about. This is something important. Bottom line of the resolution is in number 9, which says the resolution shall remain in effect unless otherwise repealed, modified, or extended. That means 6 weeks from now, if this resolution that we drew up isn't good for the situation at hand 6 weeks from now, we can do something different. We can modify number 8, we can modify number 12, whatever, we can do that. That's a working resolution. That's something that nobody in this room can tell me what's gonna happen in 6 weeks. Nobody. You know, I heard the president this morning say on TV that we aren't even gonna need a vaccine. It's gonna do away with itself. Now, how ridiculous is that? That's ridiculous. But anyways, that's why I think that you need a working document, and I think that's what these resolutions are, unless the employer know, unless the public knows what's expected. And if we don't think it's working 6 weeks from now, 2 weeks from now, we can go in there and do it, because that's what they voted us in this office to do, is to make decisions. And that's why we're here this morning. That's all I got to say.
Commissioner Clute.
Thanks, Mayor. I just want to be clear that the alternative resolution 2020-08 is identical to the one that was originally attached to the agenda. All it does is it takes out reference to the closing ordinance. It takes out the penalty portions. But it does, as Commissioner Harrington just said, it tells the community, it tells those businesses what we expect from them when they do reopen. So the businesses know these are the best practices. Customers know businesses should employ these best practices. And if they observe those businesses that were reopening not adopt these practices, they should vote with their feet and not go into that establishment, not frequent it. So I think the crux of our decision today is whether or not we're going to have enforceable regulations of these businesses going forward. Are those businesses going to be subject to penalties, or aren't they? Because I think, Brian, that's what your suggestion implies going forward. Okay, repeal the ordinance now, which would mean immediately there would be no regulation, but then work on another ordinance that would make it enforceable or punitive, okay? That's what ordinances are. They're laws that we require people to follow. And if they aren't followed, they're subject to penalties. They may not be stringent penalties, but they would be enforceable penalties. And I think that's what I want to avoid. To address the thought that we're going to have a resurgence in the future. I sure hope not, but certainly that is a possibility. We've all read that. It is a possibility. I think we will react to it at that point in time, depending on the facts as they present themselves. But nothing has changed in my mind from Monday night when I voted to repeal that ordinance. We didn't have any active cases then. We don't have any active cases now in Beetle County. And I hope that continues. If we are not a community spread community anymore. We acted very extraordinarily in late March. We were, in effect, the epicenter of this pandemic here in the Great Plains, unbelievably. Little Huron, South Dakota. We got national attention because suddenly we had this outbreak. It was unbelievable. And but now we're not. But it is around us. 2 hours down the road, Sioux Falls is experiencing a lot. But yet they're still opening. Communities all over the state are opening too. So I think the emergency has passed that required the closing. I don't think those businesses need to be penalized any further. I know as a fact, most of those businesses have worked very hard in developing protocols that they will employ when they do open. Dan Weed's Anytime Fitness, he's got a very detailed plan on how to address it if he's allowed to reopen. On Facebook, I've read where the Nordby Center has worked very hard to reconfigure their facility and to put protocols in place to protect the spread of the virus. And I just noticed this morning they're not, at least at this time, going to be opening the swimming pool. They're taking this in a very measured way. I know the restaurants have thought long and hard about it. The Hangar, Danny Hofer has thought very long and hard about how they will operate when they're open. I think these guidelines allow us to tell all the other businesses what they should be doing. And I think that is sufficient. So I'm going to vote to repeal that ordinance, and then I would like to vote in favor of the alternative resolution 2020-08, which established strong guidelines for those businesses to follow.
Further discussion, Commissioner Harrington.
The only thing I'll say about that is, I would love everybody to obey the speed limit too. But if we don't have regulations out there, they're not going to. And we won't be able to hold them accountable to anything. If we have a speed limit of 30 miles an hour down the street and somebody's doing 45, we don't have any regulations, he'd keep doing 45. So I think there's some, if we just throw it open, say, okay, yeah, you put out there what you think you want to do and possibly do, but I don't know if that gives the public any comfort knowing that there's something out there saying this is what's expected of them. And I'll go back to that again. People need to know what's expected of them. And if you think that you don't need any enforcement, any rules and regulations on that, fine, maybe you can live with that. But boy, I tell you what, I don't. If that's the case, I don't know what our society how they would all handle up if we didn't have any rules and regulations to follow. I don't know.
Well, I just want to be clear then, Gary, if that's how you.
Commissioner Klug,
Excuse
go
me, I'm
ahead.
sorry, Mayor. That you'll have to vote to keep the present ordinance in place.
Further discussion.
I have some.
Commissioner Robish.
Thank you. I do too believe we need to have some guidelines, definitely. And I don't know if this is the place to ask, but I know in the original ordinance, churches were not mentioned per se.
What was it mentioned?
Churches,
churches.
Churches were not affected.
they were not affected, but a lot of churches are asking what they need to do. What can they do? What do they need to do? The Ministerial Association met yesterday, and they have, each church has their own guidelines that they're going through also, but they want to know, they want to know if they're in this. They're not mentioned in that, but to my knowledge, I don't believe any church has been going corporately, I should say. But they are wanting to know what our feeling is on that. And they have tentative timelines that they're looking at, and that is May 29th, if I'm not mistaken on the date, that they would like to be able to reopen corporately, if that's the case. They're not saying that they will. They're asking for, it's May 31st, actually, is a Sunday. And they're wanting to know if that's okay, if that's, they want some guidelines, just like the rest of these businesses want guidelines. They want guidelines. Your businesses that are calling you, I don't know what they're asking you, but they're asking me, what are the guidelines? We want to know what we're up to. So to have them in place, I think we have to have them in place for their knowledge, for the public's knowledge. I think we have to have guidelines. I don't know if we have to have penalties, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm just saying, we have to have guidelines for them. Because they're asking for them. They're not saying this is what we want to do, they're asking for them. But anyway,
Commissioner Cluse, do you have anything new? Not to rehash what you've already said.
Well, I want to address what Mark just said. I'm for guidelines. I think Gary's for guidelines. So I just want to distill the issue here. Do we want to penalize people for violating the guidelines or not? That is the issue.
Before any other comments, I'd like to give a couple of my own thoughts here. We started this process the 23rd of March, which is not very long ago. And we have had success. We've lessened the curve, we've stopped the spread, and now we're asking to reverse that. And I have great fears that we will go back to where we started. However, I understand the plight of business, and I am sympathetic to that. I voted Monday to repeal the ordinance, but I thought we were doing something different, and as I looked at that vote on Tuesday and read some of the material that we have been getting all along, and looked at what other cities have done, especially Rapid City, because that's where we crafted our original ordinance after what Rapid City was doing. And I see that Rapid City has loosened up their prohibitions against some businesses by a resolution. They have left the original ordinance intact, and they have made a resolution that opens up, I don't like that word, open up business, but allows them to operate in a different manner. However, they have kept the ordinance in place and have crafted a new resolution as we're proposing tonight. I think our proposal, if we repeal the ordinance that's in place, we're taking away any prohibition. We're not having any guidelines. We have two proposals for guidelines. One has some teeth, the other has nothing. If we go back and look at what we did in March and how it was enforceable by ordinance, we didn't have to issue any penalties. We had a few things that we had to deal with. The police dealt with them. There was no big uproar. There was no big newspaper article about a violation. It was just handled. The people accepted that and complied. I'm fearful if we turn it loose now, most people will comply with what we're suggesting. There'll be some that won't. And we have no control over that then. I'd just like to say also, that what we're looking at today, the Beetle County COVID-19 planning section of that task force has spent hours and hours and hours crafting the resolution. And the resolution that has some teeth. This was crafted also with a lot of research from our business community, Greater Huron Development Corporation, our Chamber of Commerce. They put these things together with input from businesses. It wasn't the city commission that put this together. It was a task force that put this together, that represented the whole community. I think we need to proceed with caution. As most of you have said, the virus is still there. That killer is among us yet. And I don't want to see its ugly head rise more than it could. And I'm afraid that's what we're doing. I want to give businesses a chance to open up. I'm all for that. I understand their plight. I am going to change my vote on eliminating, repealing the resolution. I'm sorry, the ordinance. I could accept Commissioner Smith's proposal, but we can still do that without repealing the ordinance now. We could keep that in effect until Commissioner Smith and others have a chance to take a look at a new ordinance and new resolutions and have some guidelines, not only for the businesses that we asked to close, but also, as Mark is saying, for the churches, for the other businesses in town, to cover them with some suggestions and regulation. I don't think it's hard-handed. I don't think it's something that we're trying to penalize anyone. We're trying to save lives, and that's where this came from. So I beg you, caution you, let's proceed with caution here. And that's the end of my statements. I will say no more. Any further discussion before we move on to voting? We must have a comment.
We have several comments
Okay.
from the YouTube channel. The first comment says, keep in mind that Aberdeen is having a huge COVID-19 breakout, and some of our residents work there. The next comment, open back up. The death rate is now 0.5%. This is all a joke. The next comment, needs to be mandatory. The next comment, perhaps city can print up standard recommendations to be posted on doors of each business. The next comment, the standard recommendations available for businesses is a great idea. Having them available in the various languages of our community members would be very helpful. Next comment, easy to tell people they aren't allowed to make money when your paycheck still comes in from taxes. Next comment, the people that are afraid can stay home. The next comment, please follow the direction our state, Kristi Noem, has put in place. That is the direction the rest of the state has gone. Huron is one of the only communities still forcing businesses to be closed. Next comment, small business is the heart of the community, and I think many in Huron would be sad to lose so many of their businesses if you do not allow them to open back up soon. Next comment, amen. Next comment, the guidelines from Governor Kristi Noem have always said they are focused on preparing hospitals for the surge. Next comment, models now show less hospital beds needed. Next comment, we would appreciate the commissioner's trust in allowing us to be accountable for providing safety to our customers. We deserve an opportunity to serve the community members. Next comment, it's not fair that Walmart can stay open, but the small businesses can't. Next comment, will these expectations and rules be for all businesses or just the ones who have been mandatorily asked to close? Next comment, it seems the guidelines set in place by the state would be sufficient. And that's all I have right now.
Okay, thank you. If we get more during the discussion here, until we adjourn, let us know and we'll read
Okay.
those also. Okay, are we ready to move on, or does someone feel the urge to?
I guess.
Commissioner Robish.
Thank you, Mayor. I just need to ask how we're voting here, because if we repeal this ordinance, are we putting a resolution in place? Or if we don't repeal this ordinance, what's in charge, a resolution or ordinance?
Good question. If we repeal the ordinance, it will no longer be in effect. However, we do have a resolution that is in effect also right now, that we passed back in March, which says, this is the resolution that we passed. Practice proper hygiene, practice self-isolation, practice social distancing, no groups of 10 or more people allowed socially or at a business. Stay at home and contact your medical provider if you believe you have symptoms. Limit trips to purchase essential items. Limit time spent purchasing essential items. Stagger work schedules. All city and county offices are closed to the public. That is what we would have in effect. If we pass, if we repeal the ordinance that's in effect, the ordinance that we have proposed is tied to that ordinance. So if we repeal the ordinance, we would not be able to pass the ordinance that refers back to the ordinance. I mean, the resolution that refers back to the ordinance. It would have no way to enforce it. If we then go and pass Commissioner Klut's ordinance,
No, resolution.
resolution, I'm sorry, getting them mixed up.
That's okay.
Commissioner Klut's resolution, proposed resolution, that would be a guideline with no enforcement. It's like having a speed limit and no enforcement. It's a good analogy. Did I muddy up that question as much as possible?
No, yeah.
No, I think you were perfectly clear, Mayor.
Yeah. So, and again, I ask if, because the churches were not stated in that original ordinance, they are looking for direction.
Yeah.
Or they would like to start having corporate services again on May 31st. They're not saying they will, no uncertain terms, that's not what they're saying. They're looking for some guidelines.
Well, the task force is still in operation. I would suggest they contact the task force and see if they can't get some input from them. But right now, I don't think it is up to us. That's my personal opinion, but.
Let me finish. I left out one thing.
Okay.
With your question.
Okay.
We also have if we repeal the ordinance, we also have a proposal to go back next week, craft another ordinance with a resolution, I believe you mentioned, and try to make some type of a combination that would appeal to everyone, which I think is basically the same thing as not repealing the ordinance and passing the ordinance that we have. Lots of people have taken lots of time, and I don't know if there's any other compromise that can be crafted, because you put a lot of work into this one. However, if the committee's wishes are to repeal the present ordinance, I plan to vote against that, not because I don't want to see businesses open up. It's because I'm afraid of what happens if we don't have some regulation. And I guess if we repeal the present ordinance, I hope we move to what Commissioner Smith has proposed.
I would too, and I'm not speaking for any business owners because I have not personally talked to them in the last 2 hours, so I can't say that, so.
Well,
but
I haven't either, true.
Yeah, I know, I understand that, but I'm pretty sure they would like to have some business open, but I'm sure they still want some guidelines. They want some information. That's what we owe them. We owe them some guidelines. I think, personally, I think we owe them some guidelines.
I agree that we need some guidelines and we need some way to enforce the guidelines if people won't abide.
Correct.
And blatantly won't abide. We saw very little of that from March 23rd till now, very little of people not complying. Now, I know they point to big stores. That's one thing that we probably have not been good at, is giving them a little better direction. The Walmart and Runnings, I think and Coburn's, I think that were all mentioned. That is what some of the people are using for an argument now. But I think overall, our businesses have done a really, really good job. And I know that some of them are hurting now, and I think we need to act and help those businesses. However, on the other end, we have a lot of people out there who do not want us to open it wide open. They want some regulation.
I want some too, and that's how I want to know how I'm voting. I want to know how I'm voting to do that.
It's kind of hard to get it straight in our
It really
minds.
is, because if we throw everything off the table, we throw everything off the table.
I think that's what we do. If we repeal the ordinance and go with either one of these resolutions, we've
Okay.
thrown it wide open. We're saying, we want you to do this, but if you don't, okay.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes, Commissioner Smith.
going back to your comment or your direction, if we repeal the ordinance, the proposed resolution number 1 would not be a consideration if the ordinance second reading is repealed, correct? Is that the
I'm
The very first ordinance, resolution put in when they put the ordinance on, you mean?
No, I'm sorry.
You're correct, Brian.
say it again for me, I didn't catch it.
Sure. So, I'm kind of a little bit on the same page as Mark, but, if we repeal the second reading, or the second reading we approve to repeal the current ordinance, that would nullify any consideration for the first resolution modification format that was prepared.
Yes.
That would not even be a topic.
Because
Can I ask
it references the ordinance that you just repealed.
Right, so then what would be considered,
Well, I'd like
Would
you
then
to
be-
consider the alternative resolution.
But
That's
my-
what I'd like.
Here's my question though.
Okay,
When we
let's
did-
have a little, okay, go ahead.
When we did
Commissioner.
the first ordinance, did we not have a resolution with it?
Yes,
Okay, so isn't that the first resolution?
yes.
So what is he talking about?
He, Smith?
Yes.
Commissioner Smith, I think you're talking about the first resolution we passed, or not?
no, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
The resolution that was attached in this morning's packet.
Right. That's
Mr.
the
Klutz-
first one.
Mr. Klut's alternative has not been included in the packet. What
No.
I'm referring to, if I can finish,
Yeah, go ahead. I'm just-
is if we repeal the ordinance in place, does that, in effect, would it require us to even address the first resolution that was prepared?
Well, in its present form, no, there would be nothing to refer back to, because if we repeal the ordinance, however, you could amend the resolution by taking that language out. It would be almost what Commissioner Clute is talking about, except that he has changed the language to say, instead of shall, to may.
Should.
So you could still pass the resolution that's in our packets by removing the reference back to the ordinance.
And the language is should, not may. We're strongly suggesting in my proposed resolution that these guidelines be followed, but that there would not be any.
But what his question was,
Are you interrupting me now, Mayor?
yes, I am interrupting
All
you.
right.
You've had the majority of the time to speak.
Do you have a tea time or something? What's the deal here? We've got time.
Okay, bloviate all you want.
Bloviate? Is that what I'm doing? I am suggesting you said may, and the revision said should. I think that's a significant change that I was entitled to bring up.
Sorry, I missed.
Since we're confused about this, I'm gonna say it one more time, and if I'm bloviating or being redundant, that's the way it is. We had a resolution attached to the agenda.
Correct.
That's the first resolution that Brian's referring to.
Correct.
If we keep the ordinance, that first resolution cannot be passed. So if you want that resolution, you vote to keep the ordinance, okay? Brian?
Can I add something, or are you done?
I am done. Thank you, Mayor.
We can also amend the resolution that's attached here.
You can, but that wasn't his question.
See, that's where
Commissioner,
that's where I'm confused. The original ordinance that we have, did we have a resolution with that ordinance?
yes, we did.
Wouldn't that be the first resolution? Thank you.
That is the first
Yes, we-
Well,
resolution.
you could call it that, but that's, Brian was referring to the one that was attached to
Well,
it.
that's what's confusing to me, though.
Okay,
We have
that's
one resolution with the ordinance, and we're talking about repealing that thing, so it goes with that ordinance.
I understand your
So
confusion.
there's the
Yes.
one, that's one, here's two. That's how I refer to it.
Okay,
I just,
all right.
we're talking about repealing that ordinance, and there's a resolution already attached to that. That was done on March
No.
23rd. That's number
Really,
one
the first
resolution.
resolution is not attached to.
No,
the
it's not
ordinance.
attached.
It
And that was a discretionary guideline resolution
That was
also.
done at the same time as we did the
Correct.
ordinance.
Correct. But that has no enforcement provisions.
All right.
The one proposed is tied to the ordinance.
This resolution guidelines goes far beyond that, much more detailed in terms of how those particular businesses
It
should
specifically
operate.
states ordinance in-
Because now we have much more knowledge about how to stop the spread, so.
So then there's your resolution.
And then there's mine without the enforcement provisions.
All right, that makes sense.
Just to be clear, the resolution that we passed March 23rd, I believe it was, says, it's number 2020-07. An emergency resolution to address a public health crisis by implementing certain measures which have been deemed necessary to slow the community spread of the coronavirus, COVID-19. And it goes on to, there's a couple of whereases, and then it says, now therefore be it resolved that the city of Huron hereby implements the following requirements. And I read you those. So that's what the resolution said that's in effect right now and will remain in effect until changed.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes, Commissioner Smith.
I think we're, a little bit of my confusion, I apologize, it seems I'm kind of confused on a lot of things today,
Well,
but
I am too.
I think part of my confusion is the original ordinance, and the original resolution are two independent documents.
Correct.
So, I guess I was going on the premise that that original resolution was tied to the ordinance in place. So in essence, if you canceled the ordinance in place, that original resolution would also be dissolved.
I believe they're separate documents.
Okay,
That
that,
clears it up for me, Mr. Smith, thank you.
yep,
Me also.
sorry,
Commissioner Cooley, do you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
okay.
Thank you.
So to carry it forward and not to, so the draft, the draft resolution to be listed today on the agenda would actually be a resolution in effect to amend the ordinance with that resolution. Which,
That is correct.
okay, which I go back to Commissioner Klut's opening statement. The question that would arise from that is, would that not require a second reading? Because you're modifying and amending the ordinance.
I can only go back, a long way from an attorney. I know a couple of attorneys, but that's about as close as it gets.
Pretty close to me right now.
Yeah, right. Distance-wise.
Touche.
I believe that other cities have modified their ordinances by resolution. And I guess I can't tell you whether, like, a Rapid City did a second reading of the resolution. I don't think so. I think a resolution is valid as soon as you pass it.
To our knowledge, what
Or
took place
publish
there is that this resolution that is included in the packet for consideration would not amend the ordinance per se, but would establish guidelines in addition to. And it was crafted that way with the purpose of being dynamic in nature so that it could actually be modified going forward without having to be subject to the publication dates that a true ordinance would have.
I believe that's what
And that
others,
is the reason these other communities like Brookings and Rapid City and Sioux Falls and other communities have done it this way,
correct.
so that it can be reactive in nature and as dynamic as the subject is.
I believe that's correct. We have
Excuse
some
me.
more comments,
Yes,
please.
we have several more comments. The first comment, this virus will not go away until there is a vaccine. Do you feel keeping businesses closed until there is a vaccine is fair? The next comment, stay at home if you're afraid. The next comment, how is it possible that you enforced this ordinance with one meeting, but now to change or amend the ordinance, it requires 2 readings? The next comment, this was all supposed to help keep the hospitals from being overwhelmed. Well, they're not overwhelmed, open back up. The next comment, the CDC has put guidelines in place, allow each business to present a plan of action and move forward. The next comment, trade freedom for safety and you get neither. The next comment, businesses can take responsibility to follow CDC guidelines to protect their staff and customers. The next comment, customers and employees will regulate adherence to posted standards and recommendation by either quitting or not frequenting a business. The next comment, Mitchell and Rapid both lifted the ordinance immediately following Kristi Noem's press release to reopen the state. The next comment, neither of those communities had council meetings to my knowledge or required 2 readings to lift the ordinance. That's all for now.
Commissioner Clute.
If I may, Mayor, to just address one of those emails we just got about how did we pass the ordinance with 1 meeting and now we're requiring a second reading to repeal it. We did have a second reading on that ordinance. I think where the confusion lies is that within the ordinance, we said it would be effective at midnight that night when we passed it. We were fully aware that at that point in time, however, that we were still required to have a second reading, but we wanted to convey to the public the emergency nature of what we were dealing with. And so we put that in there. But technically, it probably was not enforceable until the second reading. I mean, that, it wasn't a really enforceable ordinance. But the wording is there that it was effective immediately. But that goes to the point that Brian just made and that I made in my opening statement, that you may want to call this a resolution. Apparently that's what Rapid City did. But I think it is an amendment to the ordinance, because the ordinance simply closed those businesses. This resolution, any business identified in paragraphs 1 through 4 of Huron City Ordinance 2214 may reopen to serve patrons pursuant to the conditions established in this resolution. So that's what we are dramatically amending, that ordinance. And my opinion is it would need a second reading. Now, having said that, we could pass it. We could tell the businesses we're going to have a second reading. If they want to open subject to the second reading, that would be their choice, and we probably wouldn't really have any enforcement. We'd tell them we wouldn't enforce it. That's a possibility too. But I'd really like to come out of this meeting with allowing those businesses to open right away rather than wait another week. That's my opinion. And whether it's with enforceable regulations or non-enforceable, one way or the other.
I do have a
More
few
comments,
more
please.
comments. Please reopen Huron ASAP. Our economy can only take this for so long, and there is not going to be a better time for months or years. Let people be responsible. Those who are worried can stay home. Is there an option? Proceed with caution with must guidelines. When, if our county has a surge, we immediately go back to what is working and happening now. The next comment, is any of this constitutional? That's it for now.
Okay, do we have any more discussion, or we'll move on?
I want one more thing to say, Mayor.
Very good, go
Thank you.
ahead,
Well,
Commissioner.
I think in every business, this is going on right here. And at the end of the day, it's important. That's why we're having this much discussion, and that's why we're having this much diversity in discussion. It's very important. And I think every business in town and every place in town and every home in town probably has this same discussion with the same mindset. And I'm just challenging all of us right here. Relax, take a breath. We have to vote, and we're voting for the community of Huron. Okay, so we're okay. We're gonna be fine, all right? I wanna thank each one for the time and the effort they put in. I'm not gonna name anybody because everybody puts in their own time and they all do this, so I'm gonna say thanks and I'm ready to vote, Mayor.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? Commissioner Harrington, you look like you have a comment.
No, I think public bus may be.
We have another from this.
We have
from
another
the-
YouTube comment. Please pass it effective today and indicate there will be a second reading. If you could do this when you put the ordinance in place, you could do it again. That's all for now.
Okay,
Final comment, if I may, Mayor.
yes, Commissioner Smith.
My intention will be to keep the ordinance in place with the intent of passing the resolution, the original resolution that was presented, and require a second reading on that, unless we get,
The resolution, we don't need a second reading on it. The ordinance is already.
but it's amending the ordinance in place, as Commissioner Clute has explained. right now, he's the closest thing to an attorney in this office, or in this building.
I am an attorney, Brian.
Commissioner
For
Clute,
the record, I do have a license to practice law.
Commissioner Clute, let the record reflect, I didn't make that comment. Not picking on you, Commissioner Smith.
If it's shown on Monday that the second reading is not required, we can address that Monday night. But I would also backfeed that with, if a second reading is required, that we follow those same principles that when we started with this of, I'm not going to enforce, I'm not going to be in favor of enforcing those requirements of that resolution amendment until that second reading is completed. So that's my thought.
Okay, let's, brief comments. I don't want to stop any discussion. I want everybody to have a chance to discuss whatever they want to discuss.
And just to be clear, I want the businesses to have the opportunity today to reopen their doors if they choose to do so. But I also want to follow what is implied in, is it a resolution that would not require a second reading? I would like to reserve that consideration and have that as part of, and we can get to that in the follow-up, addressing the resolution amendment. But the businesses need to open today. That's what their understanding is, that's what the implications were coming into this. And that's the page that I'm on. I think the balance effect is if we approve that, then we have to look at the resolution and critique through that, the resolution amendment. So that is why I would be voting in favor of keeping the ordinance in place.
Commissioner Harrington.
I agree with that. I think we'd love to have our businesses open tomorrow, as soon as they can open. I agree with that, Charlie. I like the idea of the resolution that's attached to our agenda now, so I don't get confused here. Would have the opportunity to amend anything on this resolution? And if we can, when would we do that?
We would do it before we pass it. You could suggest an amendment as soon as we go to the discussion of it.
Okay, all right. Yeah,
Anyway, that's how I would do it.
yeah.
I see some yeses over there in the corner, so.
Yeah, I would, yeah, and I'm gonna vote to,
Okay, further discussion. Hearing none, we will
excuse me,
move
Mayor.
on to the
Excuse
Oh,
me,
I'm sorry.
Mayor.
Oh, more from the
Yep,
public.
we do have a couple more comments. Thank you. Keeping Huron closed while other towns are open is going to make Huron citizens leave town to shop and possibly bring the virus back. Please reopen and use common sense. Can you retitle the resolution as an ordinance? The next comment, a small town and only cafe is past waiting to open, just open it.
Read that last one again.
A small town and only cafe is past waiting to open, just open it.
Okay, the only comment I would have is that last one. We do not regulate a small town that's in Beetle County. That would have to be the county decision there.
Correct.
For that particular person that asked that particular question.
Can I,
Yes, Commissioner.
I'm pretty sure I got a call on that one probably on Friday, because they heard that we were doing this morning, and I did tell them that it's a Beetle County thing.
Yeah.
But Beetle County has pretty much been involved with us on the COVID task force, so they are watching this, hoping that Beetle County will go along with what we're doing. And I don't know when Beetle County's getting together, I don't know.
Well, they have voted to repeal their ordinance.
Oh,
They have been following what we've done. I've talked to the president of their, or the chairman of their board, and he says they're probably gonna mirror what we do. And that's what we did, is we had a
okay.
repeal of the first reading of a repeal, so. Any further comments?
No.
Okay, let's move on to the question, is the second reading to repeal our ordinance, let me get the right number, 2211-6-2. If there's no further discussion, yes, Commissioner Clute.
Point of question, so if I vote aye,
Oh,
then
yeah.
I am voting to repeal, correct?
Correct.
All right, thank you. Just be clear on that.
Yeah, you did ask that question before, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to be clear,
Yep.
so we're all clear on it.
Okay. We'll move, anything else? We'll move to the vote on second, either approving the second reading of the repeal or not. So if you are in favor of the repeal, you will say yes or aye. Opposed will be no or nay.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay? We'll call the roll call, please.
Clute,
Aye.
Robish,
Aye.
Smith,
Nay.
Harrington,
Nay.
Mayor Albert,
Nay. The motion fails and the resolution will, or the ordinance will stay in effect. We'll move now to,
Mayor,
I'm sorry, Commissioner?
may I ask for, can we have a 5-minute recess?
I think that would be a great idea. That's why I was rushing through this, so. Let's have a short recess for whatever you want to do. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
But when we line up out there, let's be sure we're 6 feet apart.
Yes.